Thank you very much, Rebecca, for the introduction, and thank you very much to the committee for inviting me to speak. It is a great honour to be one of the first speakers at this meeting. So, yeah, you've already seen some of the slides, but we'll go with it. So I didn't know exactly what to speak about in this talk, right? Because I'm speaking to postdocs, and I thought, okay, so let's talk a little bit about research, a little bit about being me, and give you another example of an academic. Because while I may look most of the time as a pretty standard person you'd expect to be in academia, I have an amazing amount of privilege as an academic that fits this prototype, stereotypical, apparently male, white, that gives me, especially when you're teaching physics. That's what people expect from a physicist, right? Since I've come to Auckland, I've tried to branch out and try and work out exactly who I am as well, as you'll see as we go through the talk. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, and there's like many different ways you can talk about yourself, okay? And this is one thing, right? Because you all write a CV, and then there's actually an extra story that goes on behind that, right? Because life goes on. We're not all research angels that sit there praying at our equipment to work and give us glorious data, right? We have fun, right? Otherwise, there's no point in living. And then also, like, what goes on with the backstory to research? How do you get those papers out? There's always interesting stories to tell. And then I'm going to talk about being an academic, so a bit more technical. I'll just tell you my story in terms of not just research. I'll leave that at the end, because it's the one thing that you always think is most important. But there's other things like with service, as Rebecca was saying, that I've done an amazing amount since I've been here. It feels like that now looking back. But also, somehow I worked out how to teach students, and they tend to be very happy. This semester has been really busy for me. I was teaching 4 different courses. It was just the way that everything got loaded up. My teaching load was standard, but it was all in the second semester. And somehow, out of all 4 courses, I had 100% to the question when you do these student evaluations, is the person a good lecturer? 100% agreed and strongly agreed that I was a good lecturer. Despite having to teach 4, I have no idea how I did that, because I know myself when I'm teaching, my teaching ability went down. But somehow you can manage through. And I don't know what the solution is. I think the only solution is to think about it. And so these things are things you'll normally ignore because you think research is important. And it is. Right? Anyway. And then I'll have some other thoughts because I asked about Twitter what I should talk to, and some people suggested some things that I should include. So Rebecca's already covered this. I did a PhD in undergrad in actual natural sciences. I'm not a physicist according to my undergraduate degree, but that's just a weird Cambridge system. And then I did an astrophysics PhD. So it was pretty obvious that once you stay at your university for undergrad and PhD, you should definitely move. I applied for so many jobs, and luckily I just got one job offer, which was to be a postdoc in Paris, working in gamma ray bursts. Now, you will hear Paris, and you'll go, oh, that is a wonderful place. You must have absolutely adored being in Paris. It's great if you're a tourist. If you've taken a pay cut from being a PhD student to being a postdoc in Paris, one of the most expensive cities in the world, it is not great. It was also because, that first step from moving location, you suddenly lose all your friends. You're in a country where it's difficult to speak the language. I had some French skills, and I did upskill and I get some French, but it's still, and also the department is a strange personality. If you go to different departments, right, different universities, they'll have a different personality. And I couldn't thrive in the Paris one because unless you actually knew people, you were ignored. You just had to get on. And in theory, I should have sat there working as a paper machine, but I just wasn't able to work. And I only got out one paper in the time I was there, and I was able to get another one out after I'd left. But then I went to Belfast. Okay, now this is so if you actually know your European history, Paris is always a wonderful place. Belfast, for most of the 80s, 90s, and early 21st century, it's been a really nasty place to go and live, and yet I loved it there. The department was small, it was friendly, everyone got on, and I was actually able to be in a scientific environment where I was encouraged because of the person who employed me, which was Professor Stephen Smart. And that was absolutely lovely, and I love going back there. Right, and about the only place there's only 2, well actually no, it is about the only place in the UK I would go back to now, right? Not that I'm actually going to, no, my head of department and the dean has left, so yes, I'm not going to leave Auckland, don't worry. I don't want to scare them. And I also got to vote, what's interesting, I got to vote in the first Northern Ireland Assembly election, which is, you don't put anything on that, but then you realise, you had a moment in history just the way you was going around in the world. But then there was a 2-bodied problem to solve here. So I met my wife when I was a PhD student, and so I moved to Paris, so we was living apart. Then I moved to Belfast, we was living apart. I really got to know Heathrow very well by having to fly every other weekend between Belfast and Northern Ireland and London. Then we were able to get a postdoc. She got a postdoc in London, and I had a postdoc in Cambridge. And so I was able to commute back and forth for a while, and then she got a job as well in Cambridge. And then when I moved to Auckland for 2 years, she continued to work in Cambridge. So I got, again, to know Auckland and Heathrow Airport really well, because he's flying every few months, which is interesting, because it's one of the deals I struck when I was giving the lectureship. I said, okay, I've got a wife, don't want to give her a job, which would probably have got me turned away from the job offer, but just can you pay for me to go back for a few times in the first year? And so that was actually really quite good, and also because I was able to go to conferences, somehow I was able to keep that together, and then my wife became pregnant, so when she moved to New Zealand eventually, we now have a daughter in New Zealand. So, it's not a perfect solution, and she's still looking for a job, but she also didn't want to go back into the lab because she just hated lab work. But, she will find something eventually. And so there are, I just wanted to put in here that there are two-body and multiple problems. Again, this is like a CV story, but I'm telling you another story behind it about how you try and fiddle this in, and it was relevant because there will be another session on this as was advertised. So yes, I've been here 60 months, so I can now apply for a Kiwi passport anyway, so that's good. The other thing you always have for a CV is you include your metrics, right, your bibliography. And so I went and checked Google Scholar because it gave me more citations than the one I would normally use, which is NASA ADS. But this is what you want, right? You want to have your number of citations per year going up. You want to rank your papers. You have your H index and your, whatever, I don't know what the I-10 index is, but anyway. But I mean, these numbers are ones you're interested in, right? Because you want to show that you're at least on average, right? Because these are basically just telling you how long you've been in academia, right? They're not actually telling you anything else, and people are aware of this now, but you want to at least be showing you're being productive. I looked at then this curve that I've never seen before from Google, and you can actually see how these rates go up and down. And I'm trying to think, this is actually here between 2009 and 2000, this is actually, I have no idea why this dropped here, but there was papers I published here that I didn't change field. I was always doing my core research, but then I tried something new and different. And so because you're diversifying your time, and in some ways, it's like an investment portfolio, right? You need to diversify your investment portfolio. I was still doing the core work, but because I tried to do something else, I did take a hit on the number of citations I was getting per year. But then now it's actually increased. And actually, this year has been crazy in terms of the beginning. I did so many papers and got so much new science out. I think in the next couple of years, hopefully, the number of citations may increase, just because I've done something quite useful that we'll get onto in a minute. But then you start thinking, okay, so what do I do now? I now have a team, and this is start when you work out that there is something not quite normal with, I am normal, but not quite, there's something different about me. Okay, so this is my team slide that I now give to my students or my collaborators whenever they're showing a team slide. Okay, so you can see there are two me's. And so, when you do invite me to give a talk, you never know which me you're going to get. I'll explain that in a second. But, it's now got to the point, now I'm actually an academic, now I'm not a postdoc, I'm starting to actually have to have teams of people. Okay, and so I've got 3 students, and they're all going to have their exams and their vivas at the same time, so that's going to be nice and stressful next year. But then it's also built all this work on other people. And so it's always, I kind of always try and forget that, it's, even though I've done a lot of work along with my main collaborator, Elizabeth Stanway, all the work we've done has always been built on other people. Okay, so who am I? Dr. J.J. Eldridge. Legally, the names are John James. I've switched to JJ, though, because it's a genderless name, okay, because I can't basically make up my mind. This is the thing, it's like, yes, there's male and female, but I'm somewhere in between, right? And so it's like called non-binary, gender, I don't know, okay? There's not a name in our language, right? And in the Western society, there isn't. The interesting thing is other more ancient civilizations and cultures do have these words. Okay, so it's not like I'm doing anything new and unusual. We've been around for millennia. It's just Western European culture seems to ignore, in fact, or think there's only just male and female. But that's why I prefer them, they pronouns. It also means you don't have to try and guess whether I'm being male or female and call me he or she. Right? And yes, I always this is also the slide I sort of show students. Right? And so I'm an astrophysicist, so I do physics, not just astronomy, but you do physics of the stars. I have a Twitter account, which is AstroJ. That should be underscore, not dash, but anyway, never mind. My bad typing. And that's actually one of the ways or places I first came out more very publicly was through Twitter. And, and it's great. If I really want to feel low and feel quite positive, I just post a Twitter of myself as my female self, and everyone goes and it's great for my self-confidence. And I apologize for not being my other self here today because I wanted to be, but it's just logistics get in the way. And also it's an element of safety. You know, is it safe for me to be my other self on the bus? Probably. But, you know, there is an element of risk in there. And also it's really scary standing in front of a group of people you don't know to be your other self. I have done it in undergraduate lectures, which was very scary, but it's fine. And again, it's because I know that I have a large amount of privilege that as an academic, I can sort of like almost do what I want, and students won't still think I'm a good lecturer. As it's already said, I do read and watch too much sci-fi, which is important for my teaching. I do also have a black belt in Taekwondo, which is great for explaining angular momentum, right? Why bother talking about an ice skater bringing their arms in when I can come up and I can say, look, you know, if you do a normal kick like this, you don't get anything. If I do a spinning kick, there goes the microphone. If you do the spinning kick, I should always remember to take the microphone off, I'm sorry, right? You can see that's why, you know, in action movies and in martial arts have those spinning things because you can put more energy in because you're storing it in your spin. And it's a great, the students don't necessarily get the point, but they remember the lecture, right? Anyway. And yes, as I've said, I've been out as gender fluid for about 2 years, right? So there's always this backstory behind your CV. And how much of a science fiction fan am I? Yes, when 4 doctors came to New Zealand, I actually made sure I got a picture of them and paid for the VIP ticket. I tried to get my head of department to pay for it, right? Because I showed this in lectures, and he said no. There I was doing research. Anyway, never mind. So, okay. Let's talk about being an academic. I'll talk about the service story first, because this is something that, you know, unfortunately it's that last thing. If you look at the promotion documentation, it's always the last thing that you have to fill out on your promotion documentation. Normally it's the last thing you put at the bend of your CV because you don't see it as important. And when I was an undergraduate, I was like president of the Taekwondo club. And actually when I look back and I realized I had the impetus to try and do something then, it gives you a lot of skills you need now with trying to organize different events in different societies. Okay, and in fact, this postdoc society is great service for the people on the committee, right? So, you know, there's a really good reason to go and be on the committee, because if you think this is important enough to be here, maybe it's important enough to try and arrange events. You know, and there is typical service, right? So it's paper and funding refereeing, which you should all have refereed to some degree. Yes, no, maybe. And also organizing scientific meetings. If you talk to me, you'll hear me complaining about the 180 people I have coming to this meeting in 2 weeks' time. I never wish I actually organized it, but we'll see how it goes. But the most interesting thing comes out of being gender fluid and being more open about it. The university set up a LGBTI network across the university to try and improve the climate for LGBTI staff and students at the university. I went along to a few different meetings, helped set up Rainbow Science as well, which is the University of Auckland, the Faculty of Science's own Rainbow group, which will get going once you get some more steam up. But also working with Trans on Campus, which was a student-led society to try and improve the lot for transgender students. And it was the first time, something I've hated about myself all my life, I suddenly realized, oh, it's not so bad. I can actually help students to feel welcome. You know, and I know that the students seeing me being an openly trans lecturer, they feel at home and they feel welcome at the university because they know they can be here, which is another reason why we should have a diverse and inclusive workplace. This has actually also led to me yesterday having a 4.5-hour telecon as a member of the Australian Society of Astronomy, their Inclusive, Diverse, Equitable Astronomy Committee, because we were scoring different awards, equity awards for different departments. And that's like, I never thought that this sort of like path of being dumped on the Faculty of Science Equity Committee, learning about all this stuff by my head of department, that I would actually end up having like, not power, but like deciding whether a university should have an award to say it's equitable in terms of gender equity. So yeah, so the problem with service is just do it, but be careful where it can lead you. It can go to good places, but then you can get overloaded. Don't just sit on a committee, you also have to make sure you do something. This is one thing told me by Cather Simpson when she was looking at my promotion documentation. She said, oh yeah, it's really great, you're on the committee, but what have you done? Everybody sits on the committee, but you actually got to do something. And also don't be afraid to do new stuff. If you see a problem in your department, why not set it up? Me and another lecturer decided to set up a series of seminars for PhD students because there wasn't anything, there wasn't a student cohort. And so I went to the head of the department and said, let's set this up. It's just the same as, you know, you've set up this postdoc society for the same reason there wasn't one. And you need to bring that community together. So just to show you and just like to highlight where this has led me. So here is my other self lecturing. This is in Monash University. And there's 3 different society or 3 different groups within the university that I actually contribute to and help run. And the really good thing about the LGBTI network, we're now as a university marching in the Pride Parade every year, and we now have a presence at the Big Gay Out as well. Okay, because we want to make as many students feel welcome. And not we're trying to be ABT or anything, but yeah, never mind. But yes, okay. What about teaching? Well, teaching is really important, and I was realizing why, it's always this question, why does it seem like I get good student feedback? My head of department was shocked when he looked at my first load of student evaluations, because it was like I was a brand new lecturer, and somehow the students liked me, In fact, my head of department once got the feedback himself a few years later, saying like almost as good as JJ. And Richard's a good lecturer, but he's not. Anyway, I don't know why, and I've tried to look at it. Actually, because I'm taking this PG cert in academic practice, you actually have to start thinking about your teaching. Okay, and you're applying the same rigor you apply to your research into your teaching, and you have to start thinking, what am I doing? And I have no idea. But before I actually went to university, I had a year out, okay, because I didn't get into Cambridge, so I had to reapply. And I got in the second time round. And for that year out, I went and had a job as CompuServe. Okay, does anyone remember CompuServe? AOL? Yes, a few people, right? So it used to be the old, internet providers before you got it through broadband. And CompuServe was okay, and I had a job as a help desk, person. And then they realized I aced the exam to actually qualify as a help desk representative, and they said, okay, you can teach it. I went away to Bristol in the southwest of England and got trained up how to teach. And yeah, that went pretty well, and I was just quite honest, and I treated people were just equal when I was teaching them, and they, again, for some reason, really preferred my lessons to the other people. I don't know why. Then when I went to Cambridge, I taught in Taekwondo Club. I don't try and talk about this with undergraduates because I don't want them thinking I'm going to force them to do push-ups halfway through the lecture. Maybe I should do because they'd learn something, but I'm sure there's probably some rule against that. And also, I did a lot of first-year supervisions where you're teaching 2 students, which is really intensive and takes up a lot of time, but you learn what the students don't know and what their questions are. And that's one problem with lectures, that I'm giving you a bunch of information now, right? But I'm not feeding back what you'd like to know. I'm going to leave time for that at the end. But that helps that when you start lecturing students, you try and make yourself more approachable, so they do. And so actually I lectured the wrong way around. I started lecturing the most difficult courses in the 4th year, which give you a feel of things. And then when I came to the University of Auckland, I started doing first-year lectures, which are easy, because basically it was a public outreach lecture every lecture, because I do Physics 107G, which is a general education paper, which is just about the wonderful world of astronomy and the history of the universe and so on. And for some reason, my lecturing style is somewhere between Eddie Izzard and Robbie Williams. Because when you're giving this sort of presentation, you need to stop just dumping information. If I just stood here and talked through this slide very, very slowly, it'd be really boring. Okay? You've got to make your lectures, if you're teaching, experiences. Okay, because otherwise students will stay at home and watch the lecture recordings. Even though you tell them, and the research shows that if they do that, they do worse on the exam and worse overall than if they were actually in lectures. So that's one big tip. And how do you make your lectures exciting? Well, you put in analogies, okay, and you make it fun. You do taekwondo and you break the microphone. I have actually broken the fire alarm as well. I have have a tennis ball and a piece of string, and I whirl it round, and the tennis ball came off, and somehow it hit the fire alarm, broke the glass, and didn't set the fire alarm off. So, lucky, anyway. But I also put sci-fi on, and I'll give you an example of how you can actually use science fiction and why it's good for teaching in a minute. And also, the big tip is play music at the beginning of your lecture. Pick your favorite cheesy pop songs and put them in as the students come in, and it relaxes them. It relaxes you as well. And then when it stops, you have a natural place to begin the lecture. And I can't speak highly enough of actually making sure and thinking about actually taking a certificate in academic practice. Don't just be a postdoc, become a lecturer, and think you know how to lecture because you've done research. You have to go back and check how you actually teach or think about your teaching. You have to learn it. And the PG certificate here, done by Clear, is brilliant. I just finished my first year, and I've learned so much, which is also lucky, because in physics, we're redesigning our entire first-year course and second-year courses. And it's now informed by the best academic practices of how we should teach students. Okay. Right, and just as an example of how you can use sci-fi, right, sci-fi is great because with physics you can say, oh look, you've got Newton's laws of motion, and every single movie except for Battlestar Galactica and the odd Doctor Who episode ignores it. But then Star Trek And Star Wars and science fiction is so diverse that you can actually take examples like this. If I wanted to discuss gender diversity, I have an entire talk about gender diversity in sci-fi. And you can note there are like cases when there's a species that's completely gender neutral. But there's a few deviant people, a few % of the population, who think they're either male or female. Right? And this is just the reverse of what happens in our society, right? Most people think they're male and female. There's a few % that are either somewhere in the middle or want to switch between one and the other. And suddenly when you watch science fiction, you see the things that go on in here, like conversion therapy for the person that Soren, who Riker ends up having a relationship with, gets converted to being back to gender neutral, right? And you start seeing the scary parallels in the US, where they still have conversion therapies today. Okay? So you can use science fiction to actually make other points. But you don't have to if you don't like it, okay? Right. Okay, let's research. Sorry, have I got 5, 10 minutes? Is everyone bored? Yes? No? Okay, sure, okay. I'll try and make this bit exciting, because this is what you've been waiting for, it's the research, right? This is what we all want to do. So as Rebecca said, I do supernovae progenitors. Supernova is a dying star, it explodes. I specialize in core collapse supernovae, so this is where you form a ball of iron about the size of the size of the Earth, which is about 1.4 times the mass of the Sun, and then it collapses down to 10 kilometers across the same mass, and that gives you an amazing amount of gravitational potential energy, releases loads of neutrinos, and then explodes the star. And I was one of the first people to be around making models of the stars as they evolved towards their end of their lifetime to predict what they look like, because people started detecting them. And because of that, I became an expert on single and binary stars. But then you realize, hang on, this is actually something I had to be pointed out to me. I hadn't thought about this. My collaborator, Elizabeth Stanway, had to point out to me, like, oh, galaxies are made of stars. So maybe we could write a paper together. You know, I had stars models, she looked at galaxies. And so this led to this BPass code that predicts everything we can about stellar populations. So what individual star might look like, but also what an entire galaxy might look like, from our own to those at the edge of the observable universe. And so suddenly you start to see it's a really powerful thing. The really funny thing, and this is why it's funny being asked to come and talk to postdocs, I've never won an actual research grant. Right? You go around the university and you see the people who have like won Marsden's, won like Rutherford fellowships or these other fellowships. I've never won one, right? Which is interesting because my research is very cheap. And the only thing I actually need is the Nessie Pan cluster, okay, which is that computer somewhere in Auckland that we can just use and just without having to pay anything. And it's always been a side project, but now it's actually grown into my main research. And so this is where you have to think about diversifying where you put your research, right? Don't always just try and do your core stuff, but don't be afraid to try something new. And then if it takes off, you have to switch track and actually push there because you know it's a niche. You're doing something nobody else is. Anyway, okay, so let's take a quick overview of stars. This is how a star evolves. Our sun won't do this. Our sun will not explode in supernovae. We're safe. But a star begins on the main sequence. It's powered by hydrogen fusion. It's taking 4 hydrogen atoms, turning them into a helium nucleus in the center, and so you've got your helium core eventually with your hydrogen around it. I've realized on the bus this morning, I don't know why I've never thought about this, if you're colorblind, I apologize because you won't see any difference. And I can't believe I've never seen this, and it just makes me go, how did I miss that? Anyway, in massive stars, the fusion continues, right? And so you get a carbon-oxygen core, and eventually you get this iron core that then collapses down, you release all this gravitational potential energy, and so as this detailed supernova simulation will show you, it will explode. Okay. So I don't do the supernova simulations because they're tough. But we do have observations, and so my thesis was basically on this, where you see a supernova go off, observers were actually doing the thing where you go back and you check an image taken by the Hubble Space Telescope. It's the only thing with the resolution to do it before the supernova, and you identify a star that's got the same center as this one, and then you go back a couple of years later and it's gone. So what was coming up the computer models, you can actually compare to what you see in the sky. And the great thing is you can actually work out how massive this one was. Okay. Now that's great. I mean, this is basically a star like Betelgeuse in the constellation of Orion, if you ever get to see it. But the problem with it is that this is for a single star. That star was on its own, and 70% of stars in the universe are in binaries, roughly. And this is what happens if you start here in the main sequence. That little simple scheme I just showed you gets very, very complex, right? Because there are all these different pathways that stars can go through if you have another star next to it in a binary, because they can get in each other's way. It's not like the Earth and the Moon where they always stay the same radius. Stars can grow in radius, and so they can exchange mass. And so rather than always having these red supergiants explode, you can get these helium stars, which are very much smaller, which was always hypothetical until a few years ago, because these stars, if they lose their hydrogen envelope, they won't have hydrogen in their supernova. All right, and we knew the number of hydrogen-rich and number of hydrogen-free supernovae, and you could explain it with binaries, but we had never seen one of these hydrogen-free stars exploding, and we should do because they're really bright. But then there was this one a few years ago where the star was a like hot blue star. I can't remember, blue things are hotter than red things cooler. And this is a hydrogen-free supernova, and a number of people published on it after these guys first did their first study, that this was a exploding hydrogen-free star. But it's taking a long time to actually work out what type of star it is, and it is a binary star, it's not a single star. We can see here that this is some work we did last year, that again, we actually gazumped these guys. So Folatelli actually took the observational data with the Hubble Space Telescope, made some of it publicly available, kept some of the rest like unavailable for private use. It eventually becomes public. And we got out our paper 2 weeks before then. And there was about 20 people on that paper. And there's only 2 here. Right? Don't make your team too big. Okay. There is a case at which it gets difficult to do it. But the idea is that here is the supernova, here's the progenitor, the star that exploded. Here is it afterwards. And there is something there, but it's probably the supernova. It's below the flux that there was before. This is a difference image, and you can see there's a source there. So that's actually quite nice, that we can actually prove that the star has exploded. There's not a bright companion there. The companion, if it was a binary star, must be a low-mass star, which tells us, again, that we're going towards lower-mass stars, and more massive stars don't explode. They form black holes and go anyway. I know I'm running out of time. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you like 3 other things that these same models. So here, this is the stuff I was doing for my first PhD thesis many years ago, but it's stuff it's like I'm saying, like, this is my core material that I've always done. Okay, supernova progenitors. See a star explode, or see an explosion, see if you can see the star. What was it? But because I had those models, you can also compare them to stars when they're alive. So on these plots, this is from a paper that's in prep. It's going to be the most probably cited paper in prep before it actually is published, because so many people, I've released my models online so people can download them, but I haven't written the instrument paper yet. Oops. But all these triangles are observed binary systems where we know the mass, the luminosity, the radius, and the temperature very, very well because they're eclipsing. It's the same technique we use to find planets as well, but it's a much older technique. And the models behind are just, the colors actually represent the mass of the star. So, you know, a red star is more massive than a blue star. But it's just like trying to make that comparison. So I've compared to stars when they die. Here I'm comparing to stars that are still living. But then the fact is, you know, this is stars where we can resolve them as an individual star. If we go to the galaxies at the edge of the observable universe, all we can get are these iffy spectrum. I say iffy, okay? This is like nights of integration on an 8-meter class telescope, right? And it's these black lines, and here you've got predictions from 2 different codes trying to predict what not just a single star in that galaxy would look like, but if you've got all the stars together, what do they look like? So no longer can you work out what's going on for a single star, you have to look at the population. And it's complicated, and it gives you a migraine just looking at it, but the binaries do better, even though it's actually with this line that it does best, which is the Lyman alpha line from hydrogen. And I have never even looked at this myself, but someone downloaded my models, did the comparison, which is what's really great about making your data public. Other people can do your work for you and tell you how good you are. So does everyone remember what the big news was in February this year? What was the big thing that came out of physics? Does anyone remember? Yes, that little whoop that the universe did. Yes, gravitational wave detection. So they detected some gravitational waves. Came out in February, it was detected in September. And the funny thing is, the last thing to talk about here is that, you know, if I'm predicting these stars when they're dying and forming neutron stars and black holes, I must predict also the number of black hole binaries. So the kind of final close in the loop of this research is to do the very final event that can come out of these binary systems, which is when the 2 black holes collide. And so there's the actual data that was coming out. And here you have different predictions. You don't have to worry about it, but it's different predictions about the population of black hole mergers you should see compared to these points, which are the observed ones. And you can see that if you change like the age of the galaxy and how young that galaxy is, you can get out different masses for your black holes. So actually by measuring the masses of the black holes, you might actually be able to work out something about the galaxies they happened in or when they were formed. But that's closing the loop, and this is still work we're sort of working on. And actually, I basically know that because we published this, so we found out about the rumor on Facebook. The mass of these two black holes was published on Facebook by someone in America 2 weeks before the announcement. And we wrote a paper in 2 weeks to work out these numbers based on a Facebook rumor. And my collaborator in Elizabeth Stanway in the UK put it on archive.org and submitted it as well once the numbers have been confirmed. Which is interesting because then it's like you realize research is also about people, and you have to sometimes be careful about not upsetting people or not. I don't know. I still don't know whether we should have written this paper or not. But, you know, on the other hand, it's really colorful plots. Okay. So just to finish up my final thoughts, I'll leave them there. These are the other things that people did actually suggest, like saying, don't be afraid to say no if you become overloaded with stuff. I had to actually say no. I'm out to a number of things recently because I know I'm doing too much. Especially this semester, it's been too much, you know. If you don't wait to be told to do something, you know, you've already done it with this postdoc society. If you see other things in your department, do it. It gets you some clues. Gets you brownie points. Learn to teach is important, okay? Don't just do when you're teaching what everyone else has always done. Research, best thoughts I've heard is, this is actually, I've already said this and I can't spell, but diversify your time investment, your research. Okay, do your core stuff, but don't be afraid to try something new or work with different people. Don't be afraid also to ask for help or admit you're struggling. Okay, I do this regularly on Twitter, especially this semester. But you know, you can ask people for help. It's okay to say you don't understand something or ask questions. I tell students that, and it seems like everyone doesn't get that idea. Anyway, and all these things that we've talked about, somebody did point out, like they all work well for academic and non-academic careers. Okay, so don't think you have to, because you're a postdoc, become an academic. You can go and be very successful in the non-academic environment as well. And all the skills you're developing as a postdoc will still work in the non-academic career. You just need to sell them differently, right? You know, you can't say, oh, I've published this many reports. You say, oh, look, I've done all this much work and I publicized it and it was important for people. And like, I've got experience writing and teaching, right? So all the skills you're developing as postdocs, yes, they have to be redescribed to get you a job outside of academia. But, you know, there's reasons to do all this. Okay. So I think I've taken up much more of your time than I was meant to. But I hope that was useful. And thank you very much. I'll answer any questions if anyone has any. So thank you.